Amy Carter checked her watch as she walked across the small airfield. The morning sun painted the Colorado mountains in gold and orange colors. Pine Valley Aviation Academy looked peaceful in the early light. 3 small training planes sat on the tarmac waiting for the day's lessons. Amy had been teaching here for 8 years now, and she loved the quiet routine of it all. She pushed open the door to the flight office and found her first student already waiting. Danny was a college kid who wanted to become a commercial pilot someday. He always arrived 30 minutes early and spent the time reading flight manuals. Amy smiled at his eagerness. She remembered being that excited about flying once. "Good morning, Danny," she said as she grabbed 2 headsets from the wall rack. "Ready for some pattern work today?" Danny nodded eagerly and followed her outside to the Cessna 172. Amy did her pre-flight inspection with practiced ease. She checked the oil, tested the control surfaces, and examined the tires. Everything looked good. Danny watched her every move and asked questions about each step. Amy answered patiently. Teaching came naturally to her now. They climbed into the small plane and Amy started the engine. The familiar sound of the propeller spinning up always made her feel calm. She contacted the tower and received clearance for takeoff. Danny took the controls under her guidance and they lifted off into the clear morning sky. "Keep your eyes on the horizon," Amy instructed as Danny struggled with the controls. "Feel the plane, don't fight it. Let it tell you what it wants to do." Danny's hands were tense on the yoke, but he followed her advice. Slowly, the plane began to fly smoother. Amy had taught hundreds of students over the years, and she knew exactly what each one needed to hear. Some needed encouragement, others needed firm correction. Danny needed patience and gentle guidance. They practiced takeoffs and landings for an hour. Danny improved with each attempt. When they finally taxied back to the parking area, he was grinning with satisfaction. Amy felt the familiar pride she always got when a student made progress. "Same time tomorrow?" Danny asked as they secured the plane. "I'll be here," Amy replied. After Danny left, Amy had some paperwork to catch up on. She sat in the small office filling out flight logs and updating student records. The work was simple, but it kept her busy. Around noon, her boyfriend Jake arrived with lunch from the diner in town. Jake Miller worked as a mechanic at the regional airport 20 miles away. He was a good man with gentle hands and an easy smile. They had been together for 3 years now. Jake knew that Amy had served in the military before becoming a flight instructor, but she had never told him the whole truth about what she had done. "How was the morning?" Jake asked as he unpacked sandwiches and coffee. "Danny is getting better at his landings," Amy said. "Still heavy on the controls, but he's learning." Jake nodded and bit into his sandwich. "I saw some military jets flying over the airport this morning. Looked like they were heading north toward the mountains. Must be some kind of exercise." Amy felt a small tightness in her chest but kept her voice casual. Probably just routine training flights. They ate lunch together and talked about simple things. Jake mentioned that his truck needed new tires. Amy told him about the book she was reading. Neither of them talked about the past or the future. They lived in the present moment, and that was enough for both of them. After Jake left, Amy had 2 more students in the afternoon. Sarah was a retired teacher learning to fly for fun. Bob was a businessman who wanted his pilot's license for work trips. Both were good students, but they required different teaching styles. Sarah needed encouragement and Bob needed structure. Amy adapted to each one naturally. During Bob's lesson, they practiced emergency procedures. Amy had him simulate an engine failure at 3,000 feet. Bob did well, finding a suitable landing field and setting up his approach correctly. But Amy found herself thinking about real emergencies, real situations where seconds mattered and mistakes meant death. She pushed those thoughts away and focused on the lesson. Bob landed safely and they debraked the emergency. Amy praised his good decision-making and they headed back to the airport. As the sun began to set, Amy finished her daily routine. She checked the planes, locked the office, and walked to her small truck. The drive home took 15 minutes through winding mountain roads. She lived in a cabin that she rented from an old rancher. It was simple but comfortable with a view of the valley below. Jake was already there cooking dinner when she arrived. The smell of pasta sauce filled the small kitchen. Amy changed out of her flight suit and joined him. They ate dinner while watching the local news. The reporter talked about weather and local politics. Nothing about military exercises or unusual aircraft movements. That night as they lay in bed, Jake traced lazy circles on Amy's shoulder with his finger. "Do you ever miss it?" he asked quietly. Miss what? Amy replied, though she knew what he meant. Flying the big planes. Being in the military. You never talk about it much. Amy was quiet for a long moment. I like what I do now, she finally said. Teaching is good work. I help people learn something they love. Jake seemed satisfied with that answer. Soon his breathing became deep and regular as he fell asleep. Amy lay awake longer, staring at the ceiling in the darkness. She did miss it sometimes. The speed, the power, the feeling of being one with a machine that could break the sound barrier. But she also remembered the other things. The fear, the responsibility, the weight of decisions that could kill people. 8 years ago, Lieutenant Amy Carter had been one of the best fighter pilots in the human fleet. She had flown missions that pushed the limits of both technology and human endurance. She had seen combat and done things that most people could never imagine, but that life had ended one terrible day when everything went wrong. Now she was just Amy, the flight instructor. She taught weekend warriors and aspiring pilots how to fly small planes safely. She lived a quiet life with a good man who loved her. She had found peace in the simple routine of teaching others to love flying the way she once had. But sometimes late at night, she could still hear the sound of jet engines and feel the G-forces pressing against her body as she pulled impossible maneuvers in the thin air above the clouds. Sometimes she missed being someone who mattered, someone whose skills could change the outcome of important events. Most of the time, though, she was content with her choice. The past was buried and the future was simple. Tomorrow she would teach Danny how to make better landings. She would help Sarah overcome her fear of stalls. She would guide Bob through more emergency procedures. It was good work and it was enough. Amy Carter closed her eyes and let sleep take her. In her dreams, she flew small planes through peaceful skies where nothing bad ever happened and every landing was perfect. Dr. Lisa Garcia stared at the data scrolling across her computer screen and felt her stomach tighten with worry. For 3 weeks now, the deep space monitoring stations had been tracking something unusual. At first, the objects appeared to be asteroids drifting through the outer solar system, but asteroids did not move in perfect formation or change course with such precision. She saved her analysis and walked down the hallway to General Paul Hayes' office at NORAD headquarters. The mountain facility hummed with quiet activity as technicians monitored screens and analyzed data from around the globe. Lisa had worked here for 5 years as a xenobiology specialist, but she had never expected to encounter anything that would require her expertise. General Hayes looked up from his desk as she knocked on the doorframe. He was a career military man with gray hair and tired eyes. The past few weeks had aged him as reports came in from monitoring stations throughout the solar system. "What do you have for me, Doctor?" he asked. Lisa placed a tablet on his desk showing her latest calculations. "Sir, these objects are definitely artificial. The largest one is approximately 2 kilometers long, and they're maintaining a formation that would be impossible for natural objects. They've also made 3 course corrections in the past week." General Hayes studied the data carefully. "How long until they reach Earth?" "At their current speed, approximately 4 months," Lisa replied. "But sir, there's something else. The formation suggests a fleet structure. If these are ships, they're unlike anything we've ever built." The general leaned back in his chair and was quiet for a long moment. "Any attempt at communication?" "We've tried every frequency and protocol we know. No response to any of our signals." "Recommendations?" Lisa took a deep breath. "We need to prepare for the possibility of first contact, whether peaceful or otherwise." General Hayes nodded grimly. "I'll brief the Joint Chiefs tomorrow. Keep monitoring and let me know immediately if anything changes." 300 miles south, Amy Carter was having a normal morning at Pine Valley Academy. She finished her pre-flight inspection on the Cessna and waited for her 10 o'clock student. Mrs. Patterson was a nervous flyer who had been working on her license for 2 years. Progress was slow, but Amy remained patient with her. "I don't think I'm ready for solo flight," Mrs. Patterson said as they climbed into the plane. "We'll take it one step at a time," Amy replied. "Today we're just practicing straight and level flight. Nothing complicated." They took off into clear skies. Amy noticed more military aircraft than usual crossing overhead, but training exercises were common in this part of Colorado. She focused on helping Mrs. Patterson maintain altitude and heading. After an hour of gentle instruction, they returned to the airport. Jake arrived for lunch as usual, but he seemed distracted. "Weird morning at the airport," he said as they sat in the small office eating sandwiches. "Had 3 different military guys asking questions about our fuel capacity and runway length. What kind of questions? Amy asked, keeping her voice casual. Just technical stuff. How much fuel we can store. What's the maximum weight capacity for our runways? Probably updating their emergency procedures or something. Amy nodded but felt a familiar tension building in her shoulders. In her previous life, she had learned to pay attention to small details that might signal larger changes coming. That afternoon, she taught 2 more students. Everything seemed normal on the surface, but Amy found herself watching the skies more carefully. Military aircraft continued to pass overhead at regular intervals. The flights seemed purposeful rather than random training exercises. After work, Amy drove home through the mountain roads. The radio played country music and local news. The weather forecast called for clear skies all week. There was no mention of unusual military activity or government alerts. Jake was already home cooking dinner when she arrived. They ate and watched television like any normal evening, but Amy noticed that the national news seemed unusually focused on space-related stories. A new telescope had been commissioned. Funding for deep space research had been increased. Scientists were calling for expanded monitoring of near-Earth objects. "Do you think there's life out there?" Jake asked during a commercial break. "Probably," Amy replied. "The universe is a big place. Would be kind of exciting if we found some, wouldn't it?" Amy thought about that for a moment. "Depends on whether they're friendly or not," Jake laughed. "You always think about the worst-case scenario." "I'm a pilot," Amy said. "We're trained to think about what could go wrong." That night, Amy lay awake longer than usual. Something felt different, but she could not identify exactly what it was. The military flights, Jake's questions at the airport, the news reports about space research. Individually, each thing was normal. Together, they created a pattern that made her uneasy. She got up quietly and walked to the window. The night sky was clear and full of stars. Amy had spent countless hours flying at night during her military service. She knew the patterns of aircraft lights and satellite movements. Tonight, everything looked normal, but her instincts told her otherwise. Meanwhile, at monitoring stations around the world, technicians tracked the approaching objects with growing concern. The formation had changed again, spreading out into what looked like attack positions. Radio telescopes strained to detect any form of communication from the unknown ships, but space remained silent. Dr. Garcia worked through the night updating her analysis. The objects were moving faster now, shaving weeks off their estimated arrival time. Their behavior suggested intelligence and purpose. Whatever they were coming to Earth with specific intentions. General Hayes called an emergency meeting with senior military leaders from around the globe. In secure conference rooms and encrypted video calls, men and women in uniform discussed possibilities that had previously existed only in science fiction movies. "What are our response options?" asked Admiral Chen from Pacific Command. "Limited," General Hayes replied honestly. "We have no weapons designed for space combat. Our best fighters can barely reach the upper atmosphere. Do we have any pilots with experience in experimental aircraft?" asked General Murphy from European Command. General Hayes thought about that question. Many of the pilots with the most advanced training had retired or left the service. Records would need to be reviewed to identify candidates for rapid recall if necessary. "I'll have personnel compile a list," he said. The meeting continued for 3 hours as military leaders tried to prepare for a situation they had never imagined. Plans were made for possible evacuation procedures. Defense contractors were quietly contacted about accelerating certain aircraft development programs. Secure communications were established with allied nations. None of it felt adequate for what might be coming. Amy Carter woke before dawn and made coffee in her small kitchen. She stood at the window watching the sun rise over the mountains and felt the same uneasiness from the night before. Something was building, but she did not know what. Jake stirred in the bedroom and she heard him getting ready for work. He came to the kitchen and kissed her forehead before pouring his own coffee. "Sleep okay?" he asked. "Fine," Amy lied. After Jake left for work, Amy drove to the airport earlier than usual. She wanted to review the maintenance logs and prepare for the day's lessons. But when she arrived, she found 2 men in military uniforms waiting by the office door. "Ms. Carter?" the older one asked. "We're from Peterson Air Force Base. We'd like to ask you a few questions about your aircraft capabilities." Amy felt her pulse quicken, but kept her expression neutral. "What kind of questions?" "Routine survey about civilian aviation resources in the region." "Won't take long." Amy unlocked the office and the men followed her inside. They asked about fuel capacity, runway specifications, and aircraft performance data, the same type of questions Jake had mentioned from his airport. "Are you conducting some kind of emergency preparedness exercise?" Amy asked. "Just updating our records," the younger officer replied. "Thank you for your time." After they left, Amy sat in the quiet office and tried to make sense of what was happening. Military personnel asking about civilian aviation resources, increased flight activity, space-related news stories. Her old instincts were screaming that something big was approaching. But her new life as a civilian flight instructor offered no way to find out what it might be. Amy Carter spent the rest of the day teaching students and trying to push away the growing certainty that her 8 years of peaceful obscurity were about to end. In the back of her mind, she could almost hear the distant thunder of approaching storms. The morning sky above Earth suddenly filled with massive shapes that had not been there moments before. Captain Steve Walsh was leading a routine patrol flight when his radar screen exploded with contacts. Dozens of enormous objects appeared at the edge of the atmosphere, each one larger than anything humanity had ever built. "Control, this is Falcon Leader." Steve radioed to the command center below. "I'm seeing multiple large contacts at Angels 40. Please confirm." The response crackled through his headset with barely controlled panic. "Falcon Leader, we confirm multiple unknown contacts. All flights return to base immediately." But it was already too late for a safe return. As Steve banked his F-35X Raptor toward home, smaller craft began streaming from the massive ships above. These new contacts moved with impossible speed and agility, diving toward Earth's surface like deadly rain. At NORAD headquarters, General Hayes watched the situation unfold on dozens of screens, showing data from around the globe. The alien ships had appeared simultaneously over every major continent. There had been no warning, no gradual approach, no attempt at communication. "Sir, they're targeting military installations," reported Lieutenant Colonel Anderson from the tracking station. "First strikes hitting Peterson Air Force Base, Nellis, and Edwards simultaneously." Dr. Garcia stood beside the general, watching streams of data flow across the displays. Her worst fears were being realized in real time. "They know exactly where to hit," she said quietly. "This isn't random. They've been studying us." The first alien fighters reached Earth's atmosphere and immediately engaged the scrambling human interceptors. Steve Walsh found himself facing an enemy craft that moved like nothing he had ever seen. It seemed to ignore the laws of physics, turning at impossible angles without losing speed. "Falcon 2, break left," Steve shouted into his radio as alien weapons fire streaked past his canopy. The energy beams were unlike anything in human arsenals, cutting through armor and electronics with terrifying efficiency. His wingman tried to follow the command, but an alien fighter appeared behind him as if materializing from thin air. Falcon 2 vanished in a brief flash of light. No explosion, no debris, simply gone. Steve armed his missiles and tried to lock onto the nearest alien craft, but his targeting system could not maintain contact. The enemy moved too erratically, too fast. When he finally achieved a lock and fired, his missile passed harmlessly through empty space. The alien had been there 1 second and somewhere else the next. Around the world, similar scenes played out as Earth's finest pilots encountered technology that made their advanced fighters seem like toys. The aliens demonstrated capabilities that defied human understanding of aerodynamics and combat tactics. At Pine Valley Academy, Amy Carter was reviewing flight plans with her afternoon student when every electronic device in the building suddenly went silent. The radios died, computers shut down, and even battery-powered equipment stopped working. Through the window, she could see aircraft falling from the sky, trailing smoke and fire. Her student, a young man named Kevin, stared out the window in shock. "What's happening?" Amy's military training kicked in automatically. "Stay calm. Move away from the windows." She led Kevin to the interior of the building and tried to think. The electromagnetic pulse that had disabled their electronics suggested an attack of some kind. But the aircraft falling from the sky looked wrong. Some of them were moving in ways that violated everything she knew about flight dynamics. Jake's truck roared into the parking lot, and he burst through the door looking terrified. "Amy, something's happening. The radio in my truck went dead and there are things in the sky. Huge things." Amy followed him outside and looked up. High above, she could see dark shapes that were definitely not aircraft. They were too large, too angular, and they hung in the air without any visible means of propulsion. Smaller objects darted between them like insects around a streetlight. "We need to get out of here," Amy said. Her old instincts were screaming danger signals. They piled into Jake's truck, which had been far enough from the electromagnetic pulse to keep running. As they drove away from the airport, Amy could see military aircraft trying to engage the alien fighters. The human planes looked clumsy and slow compared to their enemies. One F-16 passed overhead, trailing smoke, obviously damaged. Amy watched it try to line up an attack run on an alien craft that seemed to dance around the fighters' weapons. The human pilot was skilled, but he was fighting an enemy that operated by different rules. The alien craft suddenly accelerated directly toward the F-16 and passed through it. The human fighter simply disintegrated, pieces falling like confetti while the alien continued unharmed. "Did you see that?" Jake asked, his voice shaking. Amy had seen it. The alien craft had somehow made itself intangible, passing through solid matter like a ghost. No human technology could do that. Whatever they were fighting, it was far beyond Earth's current capabilities. They drove toward town as more aircraft fell around them. Amy tried to make sense of what she was seeing. The aliens were clearly superior in every way, but they were not simply destroying everything. Their attacks seemed precise and targeted. They were hitting military installations and avoiding civilian areas when possible. Jake turned on the truck's radio but found only static across all frequencies. "How can they knock out all communications at once?" "Directed electromagnetic pulse," Amy replied automatically. "Disables electronics without damaging infrastructure." Jake looked at her strangely. "How do you know that?" Amy realized she had revealed more than she intended. "I studied electronic warfare during my service." It was a partial truth. She had studied electronic warfare, but as part of advanced fighter pilot training that went far beyond what she had told Jake about her military background. They reached the town to find chaos. People stood in the streets pointing at the sky where the battle continued. Cars that had been caught in the electromagnetic pulse sat dead on the roads. Emergency services tried to respond, but most of their equipment was useless. Amy parked outside the diner and tried to think clearly. The aliens had achieved tactical surprise and demonstrated overwhelming technological superiority. Earth's military response was being systematically destroyed. Within hours, maybe less, they would have complete control of the planet. But something about their attack pattern bothered her. If they had this level of technology, why not simply destroy everything from orbit? Why risk their fighters in atmospheric combat against clearly inferior opponents? The answer came to her as she watched another dogfight overhead. The aliens were not just attacking, they were studying. Every engagement taught them more about human tactics and capabilities. They were learning how humans fought so they could counter every possible resistance strategy. "We need to find somewhere safe," Jake said, watching alien fighters streak across the sky above the town. Amy nodded, but she knew there was no safe place. Not anymore. The aliens had achieved surprise and were demonstrating capabilities that made human resistance seem impossible. In a few hours, they would control Earth completely. But as she watched the one-sided battles raging overhead, Amy felt something stirring inside her that had been dormant for 8 years. It was the part of her that had once flown humanity's most advanced fighters into impossible situations and found ways to survive. The part of her that had never learned to accept defeat, even when defeat seemed certain. Lieutenant Amy Carter was gone, buried under 8 years of peaceful civilian life. But as alien fighters dominated the skies above her quiet mountain town, something deeper began to awaken. The warrior who had once pushed experimental aircraft beyond their design limits was still there, waiting for the moment when humanity would need her most. That moment was approaching faster than anyone realized. As the sun set on the first day of the alien invasion, Earth's conventional forces had been reduced to scattered remnants. The enemy controlled the skies and had begun systematic bombardment of major population centers. Humanity's future hung by a thread, and time was running out to find a way to cut that thread before it snapped completely. 3 days after the invasion began, Amy Carter's phone buzzed with an emergency alert that she had not seen in 8 years. The message was brief and direct. "All personnel with military flight experience report immediately to nearest installation. Executive Order 2847, no exceptions." She stared at the screen while Jake cooked breakfast in their cabin kitchen. The power had been restored yesterday after the aliens stopped their electromagnetic attacks, but regular communications remained sporadic. This message had come through military channels that most civilians did not even know existed. Jake noticed her expression and looked over her shoulder at the phone. "What's that about?" Amy felt her carefully constructed life beginning to crumble. "It's a recall notice. They want all former military pilots to report for duty. But you flew transport planes, right? What would they need you for?" The lie that had protected her for 8 years suddenly felt impossible to maintain. Jake deserved better than that, especially now when everything was falling apart. Amy took a deep breath and looked into his eyes. "I need to tell you something about my service record. I wasn't completely honest before." Jake set down his coffee cup and waited. "I was a fighter pilot, F-22 Raptors and some experimental aircraft that I can't name. I flew combat missions and participated in classified operations." Jake was quiet for a long moment, processing this information. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I wanted to leave that life behind. I saw things and did things that I never want to think about again. Teaching civilian pilots felt like redemption." "What kind of things?" Amy hesitated. Some memories were too dark to share, even with someone she loved. "My last mission went wrong. People died who shouldn't have. I couldn't handle the responsibility anymore, so I resigned my commission and became a civilian." Jake reached across the table and took her hand. "How good were you?" "Good enough that they're calling me back when the world is ending." An hour later, a military jeep pulled up outside their cabin. Amy recognized the man who climbed out before he reached the door. Colonel Mike Stevens had been her commanding officer during her final years of service. He looked older now, with more gray in his hair and deeper lines around his eyes. "Amy," he said when she opened the door, "we need to talk." She invited him inside and introduced him to Jake, who shook hands politely but remained suspicious. Colonel Stevens accepted a cup of coffee and sat at their kitchen table like he belonged there. "I suppose you've been watching the news," he said. "Some of it. Power's been off and on." Colonel Stevens nodded. "We've lost 60% of our active fighter squadrons in 3 days. The alien technology is beyond anything we've encountered. Our most advanced fighters can barely keep up with their basic interceptors. Then why call me back? If the F-35s can't handle them, what's an old F-22 pilot going to do? Because you're not just an old F-22 pilot. You flew the X-47 program. You tested experimental propulsion systems that pushed the boundaries of what human pilots could survive. You developed tactics for high-speed atmospheric combat that other pilots said were impossible." Amy felt Jake's eyes on her but kept looking at Colonel Stevens. "That was a long time ago. Your instincts and experience don't expire. We need pilots who can think outside conventional parameters. The aliens seem to anticipate every standard tactical approach. What makes you think I can do any better?" Colonel Stevens leaned forward. "Because you always found ways to make impossible flights work. You flew patterns that should have killed you, and somehow made them effective. If anyone can figure out how to fight these things, it's you." Jake spoke up for the first time. "What exactly are you asking her to do?" "Test pilot our most advanced experimental aircraft and develop new combat techniques. We're working with prototype technology that might be able to match alien capabilities." Amy was quiet for several minutes, thinking. Part of her wanted to refuse and stay hidden in her peaceful mountain cabin. But she had seen the alien fighters in action. She had watched them tear through Earth's defenses like they were nothing. If humanity was going to survive, someone had to find a way to fight back. "If I come back, I want certain conditions," she said finally. "Name them." "No publicity. No medals or recognition. When this is over, I disappear again and everyone forgets I was there." Colonel Stevens nodded. "Agreed. Anything else?" Amy looked at Jake. "Protection for civilian assets. I want guarantees that people like Jake will be kept safe during the evacuation procedures." "Done." Amy stood up and walked to the window. Outside she could see contrails from alien fighters patrolling the valley. They moved in perfect formation with mechanical precision. No human pilot could maintain that level of coordination while performing such complex maneuvers. "What kind of prototype are we talking about?" she asked. F-40 Nighthawk, adaptive armor, experimental propulsion, and weapon systems that incorporate some technologies we've reverse-engineered from crashed alien craft. "How many crashed alien craft?" 14 recovered worldwide. Most were heavily damaged, but our engineers have learned enough to upgrade some of our systems. Amy turned back to face him. "When do we start?" "Transport arrives in 1 hour. We're establishing a new test facility at Cheyenne Mountain." After Colonel Stevens left, Amy packed a small bag while Jake watched quietly. She could feel his questions, but he seemed to understand that some things could not be discussed. "How long will you be gone?" he asked. "I don't know. Maybe permanently." Jake nodded and pulled her into his arms. "I love you. Whatever you did before, whatever you have to do now, that doesn't change." Amy held him tightly, memorizing the feeling of safety and peace that he represented. In an hour, she would return to a world of split-second decisions and life-or-death consequences. This might be the last moment of normal life she would ever experience. "I love you too. If things go wrong, head for the evacuation centers. Don't try to be a hero." "Only one hero allowed in this relationship?" Amy smiled despite everything. "That's the rule." The military transport helicopter arrived exactly on schedule. Amy kissed Jake goodbye and climbed aboard without looking back. If she looked back, she might not be able to leave. As the helicopter lifted off, Amy watched her cabin grow smaller below. 8 years of peaceful life disappeared beneath the clouds as they flew toward Cheyenne Mountain. She was returning to a world she had tried to forget, but this time the stakes were higher than anything she had faced before. This time, she was not just fighting for her country or her squadron. She was fighting for the survival of the human species. The helicopter flew over mountain peaks and forest valleys, where alien fighters patrolled like mechanical birds of prey. Amy studied their flight patterns and tried to identify weaknesses. They moved with perfect coordination, but their formation seemed inflexible. Human pilots would adapt and improvise, but the aliens appeared to follow predetermined programs. Maybe that was something she could use. As Cheyenne Mountain came into view, Amy felt the familiar mixture of excitement and dread that came with returning to active duty. She had thought Lieutenant Amy Carter was dead and buried, but apparently she had just been sleeping. Now it was time to wake up and see if 8 years of peace had dulled her edge too much to matter when humanity needed her most. The underground hangar at Cheyenne Mountain buzzed with desperate activity as Amy followed Colonel Stevens through security checkpoints and blast doors. Military personnel hurried between workstations covered with displays showing the global situation. None of it looked encouraging. "Current status?" Amy asked as they walked. 73% of major cities are under alien control. They've established orbital platforms for bombardment, and their ground forces are systematically destroying military installations. We estimate 3 weeks before complete planetary occupation. Amy absorbed this information without emotion. In combat situations, panic was useless and optimism was dangerous. Only clear thinking and precise action mattered. They entered a briefing room where a dozen other recalled pilots waited. Amy recognized some faces from her previous service, though everyone looked older and more tired than she remembered. The stress of the past week showed on all of them. General Hayes entered and the room fell silent. He looked like a man carrying the weight of humanity's survival on his shoulders. "You all know why you're here," he began. "Conventional tactics have failed completely. The aliens anticipate every standard formation and counter every known maneuver. We need new approaches that they haven't studied and can't predict." He activated a wall display showing footage from recent engagements. Amy watched alien fighters move through human formations like they were standing still. The enemy craft seemed to know exactly where each human pilot would be before the pilot knew it himself. "They're using some kind of predictive system," Amy said. General Hayes nodded. "Our intelligence analysts believe they've been studying human combat doctrine for years, possibly decades. They know our tactics better than we do. So we need tactics they haven't seen before," added Commander Ray Parker, who was running the experimental pilot program. "Exactly. That's where the F-40 Nighthawk comes in." They moved to the hangar where Amy got her first look at humanity's most advanced fighter. The F-40 was sleek and angular, with curves that seemed to flow like liquid metal. Its adaptive armor shifted colors as she watched, matching the lighting conditions around it. "Stealth capabilities, beyond anything we've built before," explained Chief Engineer Linda Ross. "The adaptive armor can become nearly invisible to most. Detection methods. Propulsion system allows for maneuvers that would kill pilots in conventional aircraft." Amy walked around the craft, studying its design. G-force limitations. Theoretical maximum of 12 Gs with the pilot survival systems engaged. The adaptive armor extends into the cockpit to provide additional protection during extreme maneuvers. Weapons. Plasma cannons based on reverse-engineered alien technology. Much more effective than conventional missiles against their defensive systems. Amy climbed into the cockpit and immediately felt the difference. The controls were more responsive than anything she had flown before. The heads-up display showed information in ways that seemed almost intuitive. This was technology designed for pilots who needed to think and react faster than humanly possible. "When do I fly it?" she asked. "Tomorrow morning. We need you to learn the systems and develop new combat techniques as quickly as possible." That evening, Amy studied technical manuals and system specifications until her eyes burned. The F-40 incorporated technologies that pushed the boundaries of physics as humans understood it. Flying it would require relearning everything she thought she knew about aerial combat. Her quarters were small but comfortable, with a view of the mountain valley through a reinforced window. In the distance, she could see the lights of alien patrol craft moving through the darkness like deadly stars. Colonel Stevens found her there around midnight, still reviewing flight data. "Getting some sleep would be advisable," he said. "I've gone longer without sleep during combat operations." "This isn't a combat operation yet. Tomorrow is just testing." Amy looked up from her tablet. "Everything is a combat operation now. Those things out there aren't going to wait for us to figure out how to fight them." Colonel Stevens sat down across from her. "What happened on your last mission? You never filed a complete report." Amy was quiet for a long moment. "We were testing a new stealth fighter. Experimental technology that was supposed to be invisible to enemy radar. The mission was to penetrate hostile airspace and gather intelligence on enemy positions. What went wrong? The stealth system worked too well. Our own forces couldn't see us either. When we returned to base, air defense systems identified us as enemy aircraft. 2 F-22s were scrambled to intercept." Colonel Stevens waited for her to continue. "I tried to break off and identify ourselves, but the radio systems were compromised by the stealth technology. The F-22s engaged, and I had to choose between shooting down friendly aircraft or letting them shoot down my wingman." "What did you do?" "I shot down both F-22s to protect my squadron. 2 good pilots died because I was flying technology that wasn't ready for combat operations." Colonel Stevens nodded slowly. "That wasn't your fault. Command decisions put you in an impossible situation. Doesn't matter whose fault it was. Those pilots are still dead, and now you have a chance to prevent millions more deaths. The aliens won't show mercy because you feel guilty about friendly fire incidents." Amy closed her tablet and looked out the window at the alien patrol lights. "I know what's at stake. That's why I'm here." The next morning, Amy strapped into the F-40 for her first test flight. The pre-flight procedures were similar to other advanced fighters, but the responsiveness of the controls was unlike anything she had experienced. The aircraft seemed to anticipate her intentions before she fully formed them. She taxied to the runway and received clearance for takeoff. The F-40 lifted off smoothly and climbed toward the testing altitude with effortless power. Amy felt the familiar excitement of flying a new aircraft, but also the responsibility of mastering technology that might save humanity. "How does she handle?" Colonel Stevens asked over the radio. "Like nothing I've ever flown. The control response is almost instantaneous." Amy began testing basic maneuvers, gradually pushing the aircraft toward its performance limits. The F-40 could turn tighter, climb faster, and accelerate more quickly than any fighter she had flown before. But more importantly, it could perform maneuvers that would be impossible in conventional aircraft. Initiating high G turn, she radioed as she pulled the aircraft into a 12G spiral that should have crushed her against the seat. Instead, the adaptive armor somehow distributed the forces, allowing her to remain conscious and alert. "Systems showing normal pilot condition," reported the monitoring station.
"How do you feel?"
"Like I'm flying in the future." Amy spent 3 hours testing the F-40's capabilities and developing new maneuver combinations. The aircraft could change direction without losing speed, stop and accelerate in ways that violated conventional aerodynamics, and perform loops and rolls at velocities that would tear apart normal fighters. More importantly, the flight patterns she developed felt chaotic and unpredictable. If the aliens were using predictive systems based on human combat doctrine, these maneuvers might confuse their targeting algorithms. When she landed, a crowd of engineers and technicians waited for her assessment. "It's not just a better fighter," Amy told them. "It's a completely different way of thinking about aerial combat. With this technology, we might actually have a chance." Commander Parker reviewed her flight data with obvious excitement. "Your maneuver patterns showed 60% less predictability than conventional fighters. If we can train pilots to fly like this consistently, we might be able to surprise the aliens." "How many F-40s do we have?" 12 operational, with parts for 6 more if we can find the pilots to fly them." Amy thought about that. 18 advanced fighters against thousands of alien craft seemed like impossible odds, but she had faced impossible odds before. I need to see combat footage from the past week. Every engagement where human pilots survived contact with alien fighters. We need to understand what worked and what didn't. That night, Amy reviewed hundreds of hours of combat footage, looking for patterns and possibilities. Most of the engagements showed one-sided slaughter as alien fighters destroyed human aircraft with casual efficiency. But occasionally a human pilot would survive a few extra seconds by doing something unexpected. Those moments of survival gave Amy hope. If random improvisation could confuse the aliens briefly, then systematic chaos might confuse them completely. Amy Carter was no longer just a recalled pilot learning new technology. She was becoming humanity's best hope for developing combat techniques that might actually work against an enemy that seemed unbeatable. The question was whether she could learn fast enough, and whether other pilots could master the same techniques before time ran out for the human species. 2 weeks after Amy's return to active duty, the global situation had deteriorated beyond anyone's worst projections. The aliens controlled every major population center and had begun systematic bombardment of remaining military installations. Refugee camps overflowed with millions of displaced civilians while alien ground forces methodically eliminated any organized resistance. Amy stood in the briefing room, watching satellite feeds from around the world. New York City burned under alien bombardment. London was dark and silent. Tokyo showed no signs of human life. The speed of the conquest was breathtaking and terrifying. Current pilot status report, Commander Parker announced to the assembled group. Amy looked around the room at humanity's last hope for aerial resistance. 12 pilots remained from the original experimental program. The others had been lost during training accidents or combat missions that went wrong. Each face showed the strain of carrying impossible responsibility. Lieutenant Ben Foster was the youngest at 24. His entire family had died in the initial attacks on Denver. He flew with reckless courage that worried Amy, but made him effective against alien fighters who expected human pilots to value self-preservation. Captain Kate Ross had been recalled from retirement after her commercial airline was destroyed on the ground. She brought 20 years of experience flying in dangerous conditions and an ice-cold calm under pressure that kept her alive when other pilots panicked. The others were similar stories. Veterans pulled from retirement, test pilots recalled from civilian jobs, and a few active duty personnel who had survived the initial slaughter. All of them were skilled, but skill alone was not enough against alien technology. Intelligence reports indicate that the alien command structure operates from orbital platforms. General Hayes explained as new data appeared on the screens. If we could disable their command ships, the entire invasion fleet might become vulnerable. Amy studied the orbital scan data. The alien command ship was massive, easily 10 times larger than anything else in their fleet. It hung in geosynchronous orbit above North America, protected by layers of defensive platforms and patrol craft. "What's the escort strength around the command ship?" she asked. "Approximately 200 fighter craft in rotating defensive patterns, plus orbital defense platforms with weapons that can reach the upper atmosphere." The numbers were sobering. 12 experimental fighters against 200 alien craft, not counting the defensive platforms. Even with their advanced technology, the odds were mathematically impossible. "There's something else," Dr. Garcia added from her analysis station. "We've detected communication patterns that suggest the command ship coordinates all alien operations globally. If it were destroyed, the entire invasion force might lose cohesion." Might? The aliens operate with perfect coordination across vast distances. That level of synchronization requires constant communication with a central command authority. Disrupt that authority and their formations should collapse into chaos. Amy nodded slowly. It was a theory, but it was the only strategic option they had. "What's the mission profile?" Colonel Stevens activated a tactical display, showing the approach route to the orbital platforms. "Penetrate the defensive perimeter, reach the command ship, and deliver a concentrated plasma barrage to its central command structure." Survival probability? Negligible, Amy expected that answer. Every military mission she had flown carried some risk of death, but this was different. This was a deliberate suicide mission disguised as a strategic strike. "I'll fly point," she said. "Amy, you don't have to do this," Colonel Stevens replied. "We can assign someone else to lead the formation." No. If this is our last chance, it needs to be done right. I have the most experience with the F-40 systems and the best understanding of alien flight patterns. Ben Foster spoke up from across the room. What if we all go? Maximum firepower against the command ship. Amy shook her head. The aliens will adapt their defenses as soon as they detect our approach. A large formation would be destroyed before reaching the target. Small group has a better chance of penetrating their perimeter. How small? Amy thought about the tactical requirements. 3 fighters, point wingmen and backup. Anything larger becomes a predictable target. Commander Parker reviewed the mission parameters on his tablet. Launch window opens in 6 hours when the command ship's orbit brings it closest to our position. You'll have approximately 10 minutes to reach the target before defensive systems adjust to your approach vector. Flight time to target? 47 minutes at maximum velocity. Amy calculated the timeline in her head. 47 minutes of flying through the most heavily defended airspace in human history, followed by a 10-minute attack window against a target that could probably destroy them with a single defensive weapon. I volunteer for wingman position, Ben Foster said. Amy looked at him carefully. This isn't a training exercise or a combat patrol. We probably won't be coming back. My family is dead because I wasn't there to protect them. This is my chance to make that mean something. Kate Ross raised her hand. I'll fly backup. My airline pension isn't worth much if humanity goes extinct. Amy felt a mixture of pride and sadness looking at her volunteers. These were good people who deserved better than dying in a hopeless mission. But they were also warriors who understood that sometimes hopeless missions were the only option. Final briefing in 4 hours, she announced. Everyone get some rest and write letters to whoever matters to you. B. Spent the next 3 hours reviewing technical specifications for the F-40's weapon systems and studying every piece of intelligence about the alien command ship. The target was massive and heavily armored, but their analysis suggested weak points where the plasma cannons might penetrate. She also wrote a letter to Jake that she hoped he would never have to read. In it, she tried to explain why she had left their peaceful life to fight a war that humanity was losing. She wanted him to understand that some fights were worth dying for, even when victory seemed impossible. As the launch window approached, Amy strapped into her F-40 and ran through the pre-flight checklist one final time. Everything showed green on her diagnostic screens. The aircraft was as ready as human technology could make it. Ben Foster's voice crackled through her headset. Ready for takeoff, flight leader. Kate? Ready to go. Amy took a deep breath and looked at the tactical display showing their route to the alien command ship. 47 minutes of flying through hell, followed by 10 minutes to save humanity or die trying. Control, this is Omega Squadron requesting permission for takeoff. Omega Squadron, you are cleared for takeoff. Good hunting. Amy pushed the throttles forward and felt the F-40 leap into the sky with eager power. Behind her, Ben and Kate formed up in loose formation as they climbed toward the edge of the atmosphere where alien fighters waited. This was it. Everything that Amy had learned about flying, about combat, about pushing technology beyond its limits would be tested in the next hour. Humanity's survival depended on 3 experimental fighters flown by pilots who had volunteered for certain death. Amy Carter had spent 8 years trying to forget that she was a warrior. Now she remembered why some wars were worth fighting, even when winning seemed impossible. As they reached cruising altitude and turned toward the alien fleet, Amy felt the familiar calm that came before combat. Fear was useless now. Doubt was pointless. Only skill and courage mattered, and she intended to show the aliens exactly what human pilots could accomplish when they had nothing left to lose. The greatest battle in human history was about to begin, and Amy Carter was leading it into the most heavily defended target in the solar system. The edge of Earth's atmosphere sparkled with alien patrol craft as Omega Squadron climbed toward their impossible target. Amy watched her tactical display fill with enemy contacts, each one representing a fighter that could destroy conventional human aircraft with ease. Her F-40 registered over 300 alien craft between their current position and the command ship. Omega-2, maintain formation spacing. Amy radioed to Ben Foster as they passed through the ionosphere. Remember, unpredictable flight patterns are our only advantage. Copy, flight leader, Ben replied, his voice steady despite the odds they faced. Kate Ross checked in from the backup position. Omega-3 ready for contact. Amy had spent weeks developing the flight techniques they would use today. Instead of the disciplined formations that alien predictive systems had learned to counter, she planned to fly patterns that appeared random and chaotic. The aliens might have superior technology, but they seemed to struggle with truly unpredictable human behavior. The first contact came at 60,000 feet. Two alien fighters approached from the starboard side, moving in perfect synchronization. Amy waited until the last possible moment, then threw her F-40 into a spiral that should have been impossible for any aircraft to survive. The aliens' targeting systems locked onto where Amy should have been according to their predictive algorithms, but she was already somewhere else entirely. Their energy beams passed harmlessly through empty space while Amy's plasma cannons found their mark on the lead fighter. The alien craft exploded in a brief flash of blue light, its debris scattering into the thin atmosphere. Amy felt a surge of satisfaction. One down, several hundred to go. "Nice shooting, boss," Ben called out as he engaged the second alien fighter using similar unpredictable maneuvers. But their success attracted attention. Amy's tactical display showed dozens of alien fighters converging on their position from all directions. The enemy was adapting quickly to their new tactics. "Break formation," Amy ordered. "Individual evasive patterns. Rendezvous at waypoint 7. The three F-40s scattered in different directions, each pilot flying the chaotic patterns they had practiced. Amy pulled her fighter through a series of impossible turns and accelerations, using the adaptive armor to survive G-forces that would have killed her in any conventional aircraft. Alien fighters swarmed around her like angry wasps, but their targeting system seemed confused by her erratic flight path. Energy beams streaked past her canopy as she twisted through the upper atmosphere, never flying straight for more than a few seconds. Her weapon systems locked onto an alien fighter that was trying to predict her next move. Amy fired a burst from her plasma cannons and watched the enemy craft disintegrate. But there were always more to take its place. "Omega-2, report status," she called as she dove toward the rendezvous point. "Still alive somehow," Ben replied. "These things really don't like it when you don't fly where they expect you to be." "Omega-3?" Kate's response came through heavy static. "Took some damage to my starboard engine, but still functional. The unpredictable stuff works, but they're learning fast." Amy could see that Kate was right. The alien fighters were beginning to adapt their tactics, trying to surround her with overlapping fields of fire that would limit her maneuvering options. She had to reach the command ship before they completely countered her chaotic flight patterns. "New plan," Amy announced as they regrouped at the waypoint. "We're going to accelerate through their defensive perimeter, instead of trying to fight our way through it. Maximum velocity runs straight at the command ship." "That's suicide," Kate pointed out. "This whole mission is suicide. But if we can reach the target before they adapt completely, we might actually accomplish something." Amy checked her navigation systems. The alien command ship hung in orbit directly ahead, its massive bulk bristling with defensive weapons. Between them and the target, alien fighters moved in complex patterns designed to intercept any approaching threat. "Full throttle on my mark. Don't deviate from course no matter what happens. 3, 2, 1, mark." The three F-40s accelerated toward the alien fleet at maximum velocity. Amy's fighter shook as it pushed beyond design limits, but the experimental propulsion system held together. Around them, alien fighters scrambled to intercept, but the sudden acceleration caught them off guard. Energy beams crisscrossed the space around them as Amy led her squadron through the defensive perimeter. She felt her fighter take hits that would have destroyed conventional aircraft, but the adaptive armor absorbed the damage and kept her flying. Ben Foster's voice crackled through increasing interference. "I'm hit. Losing power to main systems." Amy looked back to see Ben's F-40 trailing plasma fire from its port engine. An alien fighter was closing for the kill, but Ben managed one last impossible maneuver that brought his weapons to bear. Both fighters disappeared in a mutual explosion that lit up the upper atmosphere. "Ben!" Amy called, but there was no response. Kate Ross pulled alongside Amy's damaged fighter. "He's gone. We have to keep going." Amy felt the familiar weight of command decisions that cost lives, but she pushed the emotion aside. Ben had died to get them this close to the target. She would not waste his sacrifice. The alien command ship loomed ahead of them now, its hull stretching for kilometers in every direction. Defensive weapons tracked their approach, but Amy's chaotic flight pattern kept them alive for a few more precious seconds. Target the central command structure, Amy ordered as they began their attack run. Concentrate all firepower on those communication arrays. Her plasma cannons opened fire, sending streams of energy into the alien ship's command center. Kate's weapons joined hers, adding to the concentrated barrage. For a moment, it looked like they might actually succeed. Then Kate's fighter took a direct hit from a defensive platform and exploded in a ball of superheated plasma. Amy was alone, her F-40 severely damaged, flying straight at the most heavily defended target in the solar system. Her weapon systems failed as alien fire overwhelmed her adaptive armor. Life support alarms screamed warnings about hull breaches and system failures. Amy had perhaps 30 seconds of flight time remaining before her fighter became a debris field. But she was close enough now to see individual structures on the alien command ship's hull. Close enough to identify the central communication array that coordinated the entire invasion fleet. Close enough to make one final impossible maneuver that might save humanity. Amy Carter shut down all non-essential systems and diverted power to her failing propulsion. She had one chance to reach the target, and it would require flying her crippled fighter beyond any reasonable safety margin. In the distance, she could see Earth hanging in space like a blue marble. Somewhere down there, Jake was probably watching the sky and wondering if she was still alive. She hoped he would understand why she had to do what came next. Amy armed her fighter's self-destruct system and dove straight at the alien command ship's central control matrix. This was no longer about survival or even victory. This was about making humanity's last stand count for something. The alien ship's defensive weapons tracked her final approach, but Amy had gone beyond caring about death or damage. She was flying on pure instinct now, pushing her dying fighter through the last few seconds of the most important flight in human history. Everything depended on the next 10 seconds, and Amy Carter intended to make them count. Amy Carter's dying F-40 streaked toward the alien command ship's central control matrix like a guided missile with a human soul. Her fighter was barely holding together, systems failing one by one, but she maintained course toward the target that could save or doom humanity. The alien defensive weapons had finally locked onto her trajectory, but Amy had discovered something during her weeks of studying their technology. The aliens' sophisticated prediction systems worked by analyzing flight patterns and calculating probable future positions. But what happened when a pilot stopped caring about survival and flew in a straight line towards certain death? The targeting system struggled to process her unwavering course. They had been programmed to counter evasive maneuvers, tactical retreats, and self-preservation instincts. They had not been designed to handle a human pilot who had accepted death and chose to use it as a weapon. Amy overrode her fighter safety systems and diverted all remaining power to the experimental reactor core. The F-40 had been designed with multiple redundancies to prevent catastrophic overload. But she disabled every safety protocol as alien energy beams tore through her hull. Her heads-up display flickered and died. Life support failed completely. The cockpit filled with smoke as electrical systems overloaded. But Amy could still see the alien command ship growing larger through her cracked canopy. Its central communication arrays clearly visible. She thought about Ben Foster, who had died protecting this final approach. She thought about Kate Ross, who had sacrificed herself to get Amy this close to the target. She thought about the billions of humans who depended on the next few seconds of flight time. And she thought about Jake, waiting in their mountain cabin, believing that transport pilots did not die in glorious last stands. Amy smiled as she reached for the manual reactor override. Jake had been wrong about many things, but he had been right about the most important one. She did always think about worst-case scenarios. Today, that preparation was about to save the human race. The alien command ship's point defense systems opened fire with everything they had, but Amy's fighter was already too close and moving too fast to stop. She crashed through the outer hull of the communication array in an explosion of metal and plasma that lit up the orbital platform like a dying star. For a moment, space around Earth fell silent. The alien fighters that had been pursuing Amy suddenly stopped their coordinated movements and began flying in random directions. Their perfect formations dissolved as individual craft lost contact with the central command authority that had been directing their every action. On the surface of Earth, alien ground forces halted their advance and stood motionless as their communication links went dead. Orbital bombardment platforms ceased firing and drifted powerless in space. The invasion fleet that had seemed unstoppable moments before became a collection of isolated units with no coordination or central purpose. At Cheyenne Mountain, General Hayes watched the tactical displays in amazement as alien formations across the globe fell into chaos. Dr. Garcia's theory had been correct. The aliens depended completely on their central command structure, and Amy Carter had just destroyed it, sir. "We're detecting massive system failures throughout the alien fleet," reported Lieutenant Colonel Anderson. "Their coordination networks are completely down." General Hayes activated the emergency communication system that would alert surviving military units around the world. "All forces, this is NORAD Command. The alien command structure has been destroyed. Repeat, enemy coordination is down. Begin immediate counterattack operations." Within hours, human forces that had been hiding in caves and mountain bunkers emerged to engage scattered alien units that could no longer coordinate their defenses. The technological superiority that had made the aliens unstoppable became useless when they could not communicate with each other or receive orders from Central Command. The war that had seemed hopeless suddenly became winnable. Jake Miller stood outside his cabin watching alien fighters crash in the valley below as their pilots lost contact with their command ships. He had been listening to emergency radio broadcasts and understood that something fundamental had changed in humanity's favor. He also understood that Amy had probably not survived whatever mission had caused this change. Jake walked back inside and found the letter Amy had left on the kitchen table. In it, she explained why she had hidden her true military service and why she had to return to active duty when humanity faced extinction. She wrote about the responsibility that came with unique skills and the price of being someone who could make a difference when everything was at stake. The letter ended with a promise that she would return if possible and an admission that returning was probably not possible. Jake folded the letter carefully and put it in his shirt pocket. Amy had been right about many things, but she had been wrong about one. She had said that transport pilots did not die in glorious last stands. But Amy Carter had never been just a transport pilot. 3 months later, Jake stood at a memorial service in Washington, D.C., where Amy's name was added to a wall, honoring those who had died saving humanity. The ceremony was simple because Amy had requested no publicity or recognition. Most of the world would never know that their survival depended on a flight instructor from Colorado who had hidden her warrior's heart for 8 years. Colonel Stevens found Jake after the ceremony and handed him a small box. "Amy wanted you to have this if she didn't come back." Inside the box were Amy's pilot wings from her military service and a photograph of her standing next to an F-22 Raptor. On the back of the photograph, she had written a single line: "For Jake, who taught me that heroes come home to the people they love." Jake looked up at the sky where a formation of rebuilt human fighters was performing a tribute flight. The pilots were executing maneuvers that would have been impossible before Amy Carter developed her unpredictable combat techniques. Her tactical innovations had become standard training for the new generation of pilots who would defend Earth against future threats. The lead fighter, in the formation, pulled into an impossible spiral that seemed to defy the laws of physics. It was the signature maneuver that Amy had pioneered during her final mission, now known officially as the Carter turn. Pilots around the world practiced it religiously, though few could execute it with the precision that Amy had achieved. Jake smiled as the fighters disappeared into the distance. Amy had been wrong about coming home, but she had been right about everything else. Some fights were worth dying for, and some people had skills that made them humanity's last hope when everything seemed lost. Amy Carter had spent 8 years hiding from her destiny as a warrior, but when the moment came, she had remembered who she really was and what she was capable of achieving. Her final flight had not just saved humanity from extinction, it had shown the universe that humans would never surrender, no matter how impossible the odds might seem. In the mountains of Colorado, Pine Valley Aviation Academy reopened with a new instructor, who taught students about more than just basic flight procedures. He taught them about courage, sacrifice, and the responsibility that came with the ability to fly. He told them about a woman who had hidden her true nature for 8 years, but found it again when humanity needed her most. And sometimes, when the light was just right and the mountain winds were calm, students swore they could see a lone fighter performing impossible maneuvers in the distance, as if Amy Carter was still teaching lessons about what it meant to be the last hope in the sky.